the woman left her water jar and she went into the city. What was she thinking? She couldn't have been thinking at all. Why would she leave behind the only thing she had? A water jar. And it was empty. It's how the story begins. The story begins with the woman carrying an empty water jar. And it's symbolic because it's symbolic of her life. Empty. She who has had 5 husbands. And of course, you and I automatically jump to judgments, don't we? Well, she must have gotten divorced. The story never tells us that. She could have very well have lost 5 husbands to death. But quickly, we as humans jump to judgment. So I would invite us to withhold our judgments tonight because we are the woman at the well. And we have an empty jar. I couldn't help but believe that somehow it was symbolic that we were invited to empty our holy water fonts this week. Because you walked in tonight and you were confronted with an empty font. So oftentimes, that's all we've got. An empty jar. Empty because of loss, empty because of misunderstandings, empty because of mistakes, empty because of God knows what that has been going on in our lives. And so we carry this empty jar in our arms because it's the one thing we have left. But the story goes on. And she who has this empty water jar has an encounter, and the encounter leads to a conversation, and the conversation leads to telling one's story, and the telling of one's story leads to acceptance, and it leads to understanding, and through it all of a sudden this woman begins to realize that she's not being judged. Jesus has never once judged her, but he's come to know her. And as the old saying goes, with knowledge comes strength. And so as she tells her story, as she has this encounter, as she experiences from Jesus there at the well, acceptance and understanding and appreciation and love, why, then the story tells us she leaves her water jar behind and she goes into the city. The reason she was able to do that is the reason why you and I are invited to do that as well, because, of course, she was seeking something to quench her thirst. And her thirst was for meaning and for acceptance and for love and for life itself. She was looking for water. And aren't we doing the same? Isn't that why we came here tonight, even though in the midst of the fears and the uncertainties that the coronavirus continues to offer us each and every day, even though the bishop has said you're dispensed and you're not obligated to come, for some reason, you and I still came. And I'm guessing it's because we're thirsty. We're thirsty for this living water. We're thirsty for meaning in our life. We're thirsty for forgiveness because we've made mistakes. We're thirsty for understanding because so oftentimes we are misunderstood. We are thirsty for all kinds of things because, of course, so oftentimes the jug is, if not empty, certainly it's getting there. So once the conversation happens, once she comes to move from Jesus being a Jew to all of a sudden being a prophet, to all of a sudden being the Messiah, look what happens to her. She leaves her water jar behind and she goes into the city. Now, last weekend, I talked to you about some God moments that I had had while living here in Wilmer, of all places. And in sharing those God moments, of course, as wonderful as they were, and as wonderful as your God moments are, and as wonderful as this God moment is of the Samaritan woman at the well that we hear about today, the reality is, my friends, it can't stop there. You and I need to join the Samaritan woman, and we need to go into the city. Just like the disciples had to come down the mountain to go to Jerusalem. Why do we need to go into the city? Because we got to tell others about our God moments. We got to tell other people that Jesus is this living water that they are looking for, and that they are seeking, and that they thirst for. And the way in which we tell other people that is through the form of a question. Notice how this woman goes into the city, and she doesn't tell people, you have to come. She just says, you know, you might want to come out and meet this guy. And notice what she says. Could he be the Messiah? Could he be the Messiah? What does she do? Why, she, by asking the question, stirs curiosity and interest in her fellow neighbors there in the city. And so what do they want to do? They want to come out and find out for themselves. So they believe at first because of her word. But then we're told at the end of the story they believe because they too have had an encounter. And they too have had a conversation with our Lord. And they too have come to understand that he does not judge them, but rather accepts them and understands them and loves them and forgives them. But the only way other people are going to come to that is you and I have to be daring. And we have to be willing to testify to Jesus Christ. We have to tell other people about our God moments and what a difference he's made in our lives. That's what the woman at the well does after she encounters Jesus Christ. She leaves her water jar behind because she doesn't need it anymore. She has become the water jar. You and I have become the water jar, and we are filled with living water. So let us rejoice. Let us know that we have Christ dwelling within us, and that Christ that dwells within us, why? It is living indeed, and it is effective. And this love is non-judgmental, and it's understanding, and it's accepting, and it's empowering, and invites you and I to keep coming to the well so that we might recognize these God moments in our life, so that we might then go and share Jesus Christ with others. Because that's, my friends, is what's going to bring people back into our churches. And that's what's going to fill our pews, is you and I willing to be like that woman who dares to leave behind a jar which we don't need anymore because we've become the jar and we are filled.